Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. The EU-Mercosur trade agreement, decades in the making, is once again at the centre of a political storm in Brussels. Promoted as a major boost for EU competitiveness, it has triggered fierce resistance from farmers and several member states, including Poland and France. With new safeguard clauses, parliamentary infighting, and key votes looming, the future of the deal remains uncertain. Joining us is Tomasz Włostowski, he's managing partner at EU Strategies, to assess what's at stake for Polish business and the wider region. Tomasz, welcome back. Thanks for taking the time.
Good to be back.
So what's the latest you have on the negotiations? We hear about the protests in Brussels, the French farmers and so on, but what's going on the bureaucratic stroke diplomatic front?
Well, basically, the Danish presidency of the council is trying to suss out whether they have the necessary support in the council to push through the approval by the EU member states. I think, just to put things in context, maybe let's zoom out. We have basically three Mercosur sort of documents that we're talking about, right? One is the sort of the big EU Mercosur partnership agreement, which is the big overarching agreement. Within that, there is a trade agreement, and that's the thing we're talking about. And then within the trade agreement, there's the safeguard element, which basically allows both the EU and Mercosur to protect itself, against sudden surge of imports. Now, the big all-encompassing partnership agreement that needs to be approved by the EU and by member states individually. It needs to be ratified by each member state, and that's going to take years. The thing at stake now is basically the trade agreement, which is basically an EU-only competence. So basically the EU can do it itself without sort of member states separately ratifying the agreement. But that requires qualified majority in the council. And so basically the big question is whether the Danish presidency of the council, whether the commission also, because the commission is the big sort of player in the background, whether it can sort of muster support among sufficient number of member states to prevent what's called sort of in the EU jargon of a blocking minority of forming in the council that can block the approval. And the thing we had today, the bilateral safeguard clause, basically it's a sort of an internal EU law document that allows sort of the EU to protect itself against sudden surge of imports from South America in terms of agriculture. And that's supposed to give member states sort of the political or emotional comfort that, once the safety mechanism is in place, then we can afford to actually approve the trade agreement. And that's the big question, whether that's sufficient.
So just to be clear here, the thing isn't actually going to be implemented. The agreement isn't going to be implemented until these mechanics are in place and the trade agreement is eventually signed. Is that correct?
That's more or less correct, but we're basically running out of time. And the reason why we're running out of time is because Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, is going to Brazil on the 20th of December. So, so she's basically already packed and ready to go. But when she goes to Brazil, what she would like to do is she would like to sign the agreement. And to do that, she would like to have some type of a backing from the member states to allow her to do that. And that's why we sort of have this sudden rush in the last minutes of getting the thing approved, because she doesn't want to go there empty-handed.
So when will we know whether it has been approved, and what happens if it's not?
Well, I think the ideal plan was that now that we have sort of once that we have the bilateral safety clause approved, we don't actually have it approved yet because the parliament just voted on it today, but because the version of the parliament inserted a number of sort of amendments, they accelerated the procedure and they changed a couple of sort of conditions and they added new products to the list. It differs from what the council did. Basically, we need an agreement between the council and the parliament before this becomes law, but hopefully this can be done really in one go. But this is it. But then the idea was that we would have this in place by the European Council meeting, which is at the end of this week. And, luckily that's 18th and 19th of December. So this is right before she goes to Brazil. So idea, I think, was that we would have sort of the backing, at least informal, maybe formal backing from member states by the time she goes to Brazil. So the idea was that sometime this week we would have it all wrapped up and she would have the comfort of having the support and being able to go to Brazil and say, look, we're signing this.
But what happens if she doesn't get that support?
Well, that depends. Number one is I think it's a massive blow just to the EU institutions because this is one thing, and we're not talking about the other thing, which is really dominating the headlines this week, which is the Ukraine reparations loan and the frozen assets of the Russian central bank. But basically, we have two really big tickets on the agenda, and both of them look increasingly shady and increasingly volatile. So this European Council really needs to the EU institutions need to get two things resolved this week. If they don't, it's not the end of the world. A lot of people say, look, we've been negotiating this for 26 years already. So, if we add a couple of months, it's not going to change anything. But, this would be a political blow, I think, for her to go there and not have the thing wrapped up. Then, if we don't have it wrapped up, there will be pushes to change the agreement again, because let's face it, the whole thing is not about delay of the agreement, it's about changing it. So if we don't sign it this year, there will be an increased push, an increased sort of offensive by the farmers and by the populace to try to sort of unravel some of the key provisions of the agreement that would require consent of course, the South American countries, which are already fed up with how long this is taking, and they've already conceded a number of times, and they've agreed to add new provisions into the agreement that was supposed to be already final. So it really does not make European Union look good. Is it the end of the agreement? Probably not. But is it a blow to the agreement and to the European institutions' position? Absolutely yes.
And a personal embarrassment for Ursula von der Leyen, I'm sure. Now, what is it? I mean, there are safeguards you mentioned earlier. What are those safeguards, and why aren't the farmers happy now?
Well, the safeguard instrument is basically, look, it's not very important, to be very frank. I think it's the name of the institution, of the instrument, safeguard, which gives it more sort of importance than it actually does. Well, basically, the way the instrument works is that if there is a sudden increase of imports into the EU of certain products which are listed in this instrument. This is mainly agricultural things. It's dairy products, it's meats, it's some grains, it's ethanol, biodiesel, honey, rum. So basically it's 24 items, all agricultural related. And if there is a sudden increase in imports, basically what happens is the Commission initiates a really quick proceeding to establish whether the conditions to implement the safeguard are met. And if they are, what happens is that we either freeze the further opening up of the European market for this product, or we go back to the original sort of position where we reimpose the duties that we've removed, or we close down the quotas that we've opened. But basically, it's a limited instrument because it doesn't really, it sort of reverses the liberalization of trade that the Mercosur agreement is supposed to provide, but it doesn't really affect the change of the position of the farmers in Europe. And this goes to your second question, which is why are the farmers so anti the Mercosur agreement? Let's keep in mind, South America is really far away from Europe. So, the trade in agricultural terms is not that significant. It's about 28 billion both ways. Most of it is trade coming into the EU, of course. We export not that much. But, the whole agricultural trade with Mercosur it's less than 20% of total trade in goods and services. So it's not a lot. And the farmers are mainly concerned because they're concerned about a lot of other things, not only South America. They're concerned about the reform of the Common Agricultural Policy. They're concerned about the merging of the Common Agricultural Policy funds with cohesion funds. They're concerned about increased conditionality. They're also concerned about the sort of the Green Deal policies which are still being implemented, and they realize that as the EU strives to sort of reduce its emissions even further, at some point they're going to go for agriculture because there's only so much emissions you can cut from the industry, and that has already been done. So I think it's general concerns of the farmers about the future more than specifically about Mercosur.
How much influence do the farmers have in Brussels? I mean, I've highlighted France and Poland, but I'm sure these aren't the only countries that are affected. Can they do anything to reverse or slow down the final agreement?
Well, look, I would say, to be very frank, I think farmers have an outsized influence on politics. And when I say outsized influence, what I mean is that they have sort of more influence than you would imagine, just considering that farmers in general are not that big of European population, right? And not that big part of GDP of any European country. But it's quite a big group with a lot of influence over Central European centrist politicians these days. You see that the center right, in particular, the main European party, the European People's Party, which is basically ruling Europe right now. It's the largest party in the parliament. Ursula von der Leyen is from this party. Most of the representatives of member states in the council are from EPP. Basically, they're really making sure that the far right does not make any more gains among the farmers, because that's where the far right has been expanding in the farming community as well. So the center right, is extremely sensitive to the plight of the farmers, and basically any concern of the farmers, they're really seriously taking on board. And the farmers have been, to answer your question really quick, they've been extremely, extremely successful in getting some concessions from the Commission and from the politicians. I don't think they're able to completely unravel the Mercosur agreement, but I think this is basically the political idea is to delay it and then to kill it once it's delayed. And that's exactly why the Commission doesn't want to delay it, because they realize what's really at stake.
Understand. So a bit of a slippery slope. Now, assuming everything goes through, impact on the European economy of these imports, what do we expect to see?
Well, look, in terms of agriculture, of course, we're going to see sort of more imports from South America. But again, the concessions that the European Union made are really minuscule, I would say, in the grand scheme of the trade relationship with Mercosur. So hopefully, if you ask the Commission, what will we see? The Commission is going to tell you we're going to see a sudden increase in European exports to South America. We're going to see a lot of increased services exports as well, because we keep talking about trade, but we keep forgetting about services. Mercosur is opening up its financial services, telecom services markets. That's really important for our companies, which are already there, but it will severely facilitate their operations there. So basically, when we start exporting things, even like, with German cars, for example, Germany is the main trading partner of most of countries in Europe. So, those German cars are German in name only because they've got components from all over Europe. So essentially the Commission thinks, and correctly, that increased European manufacturing exports to South America will really provide a boost to manufacturing all across the EU.
Understood. Well, Tomasz Włostowski, thank you very much, as always, for sharing your analysis and laying things out for our audience. Have a good evening, sir.
You too. Thank you for having me.
Bye now. And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. But as always, don't go away. Lots more coming up. Goodbye.